The first thing my family took from me was my seat, not metaphorically, literally. I arrived at the engagement dinner 10 minutes early, as usual, because being punctual was the only way I'd ever learned to justify my presence. The private room at Layton House, a historic restaurant in Charleston, South Carolina, was already half full. White linen tablecloths, crystal glasses, place cards written in elegant black script. I scanned the table once, then twice. My name wasn't there. My younger sister, Caroline Whitmore, sat front and center beside her fiancé, glowing in a silk ivory dress, already holding court. My parents, Richard Whitmore and Elaine Whitmore, occupied the seats closest to the head of the table. My older brother, Jonathan Whitmore, leaned back comfortably, jacket off, drink in hand, laughing like he owned the room. There was an empty chair against the wall. No place setting, no card. That was when I understood.
This wasn't an oversight. This was a decision.
Before I tell you how that single missing chair unraveled my entire family, do me a favor. If you've ever been the one excluded, overlooked, or quietly pushed aside, hit like, leave a comment, or subscribe. You'll want to hear how this ends. I didn't say anything. I never did. I simply took the chair by the wall and waited. My name is Evelyn Whitmore. I was 31 years old at the time. I had flown in from Denver, where I worked as a senior risk compliance analyst for a national healthcare network, overseeing regulatory exposure across 7 states. My job involved numbers, contracts, liability. I was paid well to see problems before they exploded. At home, though, I was still treated like one. The engagement dinner was for Caroline. She was 27, charming, emotionally volatile, and very good at being loved. She always had been. Jonathan, at 35, was the family success story. Real estate development, country club membership, 2 kids already enrolled in a private school they couldn't yet spell. And me. I was the quiet one, the reliable one, the one you didn't worry about because I never asked for anything, which is how people justify taking from you without guilt. The waiter passed me without acknowledging my chair. I watched as menus were distributed, wine poured, toasts rehearsed. My mother leaned toward Caroline and adjusted a loose curl near her cheek. "You look perfect," Elaine said, loud enough for the table to hear. Caroline smiled. "Wait until you see the venue." Jonathan raised his glass. "To my baby sister, marrying up." Laughter. No one looked at me. The first mini-hook came when my father stood and tapped his glass. "I'd like to say a few words," Richard announced. "This engagement marks not just a union of 2 people, but the continuation of our family legacy." Legacy. That word always showed up when money was involved. He spoke about Caroline's future, about Jonathan's support, about family unity. I noticed how his eyes never drifted toward the wall. When dinner was served, there were 8 plates brought out. 8. There were 9 of us in the room. I didn't correct anyone. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. Hunger was familiar. So was restraint. Halfway through the main course, Caroline finally noticed. "Oh," she said lightly, turning toward me. "Evelyn, did you eat already?" I met her eyes. Calm. Neutral. "No." She blinked, then laughed. "Oops. I guess we forgot to add you to the count." My mother frowned. "Well, you didn't RSVP, clearly." I had the email. "It's fine," I said. "I'm not very hungry." That lie tasted bitter. Later that night, as dessert plates were cleared, the real reason for the dinner surfaced. Richard placed a leather folder on the table. "As part of the wedding planning," he said, "your mother and I have decided to transfer ownership of the Summersby property to Caroline. It makes sense. A fresh start. A gift." Summersby was the coastal estate my grandmother had left to the family. I had spent entire summers there. I had managed its renovation permits when no one else wanted the headache. Caroline gasped. "Are you serious?" Jonathan grinned. "That place is worth at least $4 million now." I felt something settle in my chest. Not pain. Recognition. I already knew. "What about the rest of us?" Jonathan asked, casually. Richard waved his hand. "You're taken care of. This is about balance." No one asked about me. I didn't interrupt. I didn't remind them that I had paid property taxes on Summersby for 3 years when the trust was being sorted. I didn't mention the legal opinion I'd quietly commissioned after my grandmother's death. I had learned something in my line of work. People tell the truth when they think you're irrelevant. When the check came, Jonathan reached for it, then paused. "Dad's got it," he said. Elaine smiled. Of course. No one looked at me when I stood. "I'm going to step outside," I said. The night air was heavy with salt and jasmine. I leaned against the brick wall, pulled out my phone, and opened the document I'd reviewed 100 times. The will, not the version my parents referenced. The filed one, the notarized one. The one naming me as executor in the event of contested distribution. I hadn't planned to act tonight. I had wanted to see how far they would go. Now I knew. Behind me, laughter spilled through the open doors. Glasses clinked. Plans were made. Inside that room, they thought they had erased me. What they didn't realize was that the moment they took my seat was the moment I stopped asking for one. And I don't forget decisions like that. The next morning, my mother called like nothing had happened. Her name, Elaine Whitmore, flashed across my phone while I was standing at the airport rental car counter, waiting to return a sedan I hadn't really needed. I let it ring twice longer than usual, not to punish her, just to remind myself that I had choices now. "Evelyn," she said when I answered, voice already layered with practiced warmth. "Did you get back to your hotel safely last night?" "I did." A pause, the kind that waits for reassurance. "We were worried," she continued. "You slipped out so quietly." I pictured the empty chair again, the missing plate. "I wasn't feeling well," I said. It was the truth, just not in the way she would understand. "Well," Elaine sighed, "you know how these family events are. Everyone's emotions run high. Caroline's under so much pressure." Caroline. Always Caroline. "I'm flying back to Denver today," I said, cutting in before she could redirect the conversation. "I wanted to let you know." Another pause. Sharper this time. "So soon?" she asked. "Your father was hoping you could stay another day. There are a few things we need to discuss as a family." That was new. "Like what?" I asked. "Well," she hesitated, then lowered her voice as if someone might overhear through the phone. "About Summersby. About expectations. We don't want misunderstandings." I smiled to myself. "I don't have any misunderstandings," I said evenly. She exhaled, relief creeping into her tone. "Good. I knew you'd be reasonable. You always are. Reasonable." That word had followed me my entire life. It was how they framed compliance as a virtue. Before she could continue, I ended the call. At the airport lounge, I opened my laptop and logged into the secure folder I'd kept untouched for years. The one labeled simply, Whitmore. Inside were scanned documents, correspondence, payment receipts, and legal notes. I hadn't gathered them out of spite. I'd gathered them because no one else ever bothered to remember details. Mini hook, whether I wanted it or not. I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A payment record from 8 years ago. A wire transfer tied to Summersby's renovation account. The sender wasn't my father. It was me. I'd forgotten about that summer. The year my grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, had fallen ill. The year I took unpaid leave from my first job to help manage her affairs while everyone else was too busy. I remembered now. I'd paid contractors directly when delays threatened to push the property into violation. At the time, my father had promised reimbursement once the estate settled. It never had. At $31,000, the amount wasn't devastating, but it was documented. And more importantly, it was mine. The plane ride back to Denver was smooth. I slept for 20 minutes, woke with clarity, and made a decision I should have made years earlier. I stopped waiting. 2 weeks later, the wedding planning escalated. Caroline created a family group chat titled Whitmore Wedding Countdown. I was added last. The messages were relentless. Venue photos, dress fittings, seating charts, financial updates disguised as excitement. Jonathan chimed in constantly. Advice, opinions, jokes. My role, as usual, was observational. Until Caroline messaged privately. "Hey Ev," she wrote. "Quick question. Since you're not really involved in the ceremony, would you mind helping with some logistics?" I stared at the screen. "What kind of logistics?" I asked. She replied almost immediately. "Budget tracking, vendor contracts. You're good at that stuff, right?" I was. That was the problem. "I charge for that professionally," I typed back, then deleted it. Instead, I wrote, "Let me see what I can do." She sent a heart emoji. Gratitude without respect. Over the next 10 days, she forwarded contracts without context, asked me to review clauses, flag risks, negotiate payment timelines. I did it all. Quietly. Efficiently. And then I noticed something else. My name wasn't on the guest list for the rehearsal dinner, not even an afterthought this time. I wasn't there at all. I called my brother. "Jonathan," I said when he answered. "Am I attending the rehearsal dinner?" A pause. Then a laugh. "Oh, I assumed you knew. It's mostly immediate family and the wedding party." "I am immediate family." "Yeah, but you're not in the wedding," he replied. Caroline wanted to keep it intimate. Intimate. Another word that meant exclusion. "I see," I said. "Don't take it personally," he added quickly. "You know how she is." I did know. And I knew how he was, too. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, city humming below, and finally allowed myself to name the pattern. This wasn't neglect. It was control. They kept me close enough to be useful, distant enough to be disposable. The following week, an envelope arrived at my door. No return address. Inside was a formal letter from a law firm in Savannah, Georgia. The subject line made my pulse slow instead of spike. Notice of Trust Amendment. I read it once. Then again. The Summersby property had been restructured into a new trust. Caroline was listed as primary beneficiary, Jonathan secondary. My name appeared only once. Removed as contingent executor. The date on the amendment was 6 months earlier. Before the engagement, before the dinner, before the missing chair. They hadn't just decided to exclude me. They'd planned it. I sat back and let that sink in. Then I made one call. "Mark," I said when the man on the other end answered. "It's Evelyn Whitmore. You handled my grandmother's probate case years ago." There was a pause. Then recognition. "I remember. Mark Feldman, estate litigation attorney. How can I help you?" "I think my family may have made a mistake," I said calmly. "And I need to know exactly how much it's going to cost them." Silence stretched. Then a quiet, professional reply. "Why don't you send me everything you have?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. And they still had no idea who they'd pushed out of the room. By the time Mark Feldman called me back, I already knew the answer. He didn't sound surprised. That alone told me everything. "I've reviewed the documents you sent," Mark said, his voice steady, practiced. "And I want to be very clear about something, Evelyn. What your parents did may be legal on the surface, but the process is vulnerable." "Vulnerable how?" I asked. "In 3 ways," he replied. "Undue influence, failure to disclose material contributions, and a procedural inconsistency that shouldn't exist if this amendment was properly executed." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the Denver skyline through my office window. "So it wasn't clean?" "No," Mark said. "It was convenient." That word again. I didn't rush him. Silence had become one of my sharper tools. "Your grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, appointed you executor for a reason," Mark continued. "She trusted you. There's documented correspondence supporting that. Removing you without notice while redistributing the primary asset raises questions." "Questions for whom?" I asked. "For a judge," he said. That was the moment the situation shifted. Up until then, everything had lived in the emotional space of family drama. Hurt feelings, old patterns, quiet exclusions. But judges didn't care about feelings. They cared about paper trails. And I had those. Mini hook. Mark said something next that I hadn't anticipated. "There's another issue," he added. "Summersby may not be entirely theirs to give." I closed my eyes briefly. "Explain." "Your grandmother placed a conditional clause in the original will. It ties ownership continuity to the individual who maintained the property in compliance during the first 5 years after her death." "That was me," I said immediately. "Yes," Mark replied, "and we can prove it." After the call ended, I sat very still. For years, I had convinced myself that staying quiet was maturity, that letting things slide was peacekeeping, that being overlooked was preferable to being resented. But what my family had done wasn't passive. It was deliberate. 2 days later, I flew to Savannah to meet Mark in person. His office overlooked the historic district, all brick and ironwork and old money. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He spread documents across the table like cards. "Your parents assumed you wouldn't fight," he said. that you'd be embarrassed, that you'd want to avoid public conflict. They're not wrong, I said, about who I used to be. Mark studied me for a moment. You don't sound angry. I'm not, I replied. I'm clear. That seemed to satisfy him. We can file a petition to challenge the trust amendment, he said. But timing matters. Why? I asked. Because Caroline's wedding is in 6 weeks, he said. And the Summersby property is listed as collateral in the wedding financing documents. That caught my attention. Financing? I repeated. Yes. Venue deposit, event insurance, liquor liability, all tied to the estate asset. In other words, they had leveraged an inheritance they hadn't fully secured. I nodded slowly. So if ownership is disputed, everything freezes, Mark finished. Accounts, transfers, contracts. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply noted the leverage. Back in Denver, my phone began buzzing more frequently. Caroline called twice in one day. I let both go to voicemail. Jonathan texted. Hey, Dad says you've been talking to a lawyer. What's going on? I waited an hour before responding. I'm reviewing my grandmother's estate records. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. That seems unnecessary, he wrote. Everything's already settled. I stared at the word settled. Nothing in my life had ever felt settled. I'll let you know if there's an issue, I replied. There was a knock on my office door later that afternoon. My colleague and friend, Dana Morales, leaned in. She was 42, sharp-eyed, and had seen enough corporate implosions to recognize one forming. You okay? She asked. Yes, I said. Why? You've been quiet all week, Dana replied. Quiet. I considered deflecting, then decided not to. My family is trying to write me out of something that isn't theirs alone, I said. Dana didn't react emotionally. She never did. Do you have documentation? She asked. Yes. Legal counsel? Yes. Then stop doubting yourself, she said. People don't get this far by accident. That night, I opened the wedding group chat for the first time in days. Caroline had posted a seating chart. My name appeared. At the very back, table 12. Beside a distant cousin and a +1 I didn't know. The irony wasn't lost on me. She still needed me present, just contained. Mini hook. A message followed immediately after. Ev, can you look over the final vendor invoices? There's a discrepancy. I typed back slowly. I'll review them tomorrow. Tomorrow, I filed the petition. Mark submitted it to the probate court in Chatham County at 9:14 a.m. At 9:27 a.m., my mother called. Evelyn, Elaine Whitmore said, voice tight. Why are we receiving notices from the court? I imagine because the court noticed something, I replied. What are you doing? She demanded. I'm protecting what I maintained, I said calmly, the same way I always have. There was a sharp intake of breath. This is going to humiliate the family, she said. I closed my eyes briefly. No, I said. What you did already did that. This just documents it. She hung up. By evening, Jonathan called. His tone was different now, controlled, measured. You're putting Caroline's wedding at risk, he said. I didn't, I replied. You did. When you assumed I wouldn't respond. She's devastated, he pressed. I thought of the empty chair, the missing plate, the amended trust. I've been devastated quietly for years, I said. You didn't notice. Silence stretched between us. You don't have to do this, Jonathan said finally. We can talk. We've talked, I replied. You just never listened. That night, an email came through from the venue. Subject: contractual hold pending asset verification. I stared at it, heart steady. The machine had begun to move. And once systems start correcting themselves, they don't stop for emotions. I didn't know yet how far this would go, but I knew one thing with certainty. They had mistaken my silence for consent, and that was going to cost them more than a wedding. The first thing that collapsed was the timeline. Caroline called at 6:42 a.m., which told me everything before I even answered. She never woke up early unless something was wrong. What did you do? She asked, skipping my name entirely. I was already awake, coffee untouched, laptop open. I'd been reviewing the court filing timestamps again, not because I needed to, but because clarity calms me. Good morning to you too, Caroline, I said. This isn't funny, she snapped. The venue just put everything on hold. They're saying the estate paperwork is under review. That sounds accurate, I replied. Her breathing sharpened. Why would you do this now? Why would you try to sabotage my wedding? I waited a beat, not to provoke her, to steady myself. I didn't sabotage anything, I said. I challenged a trust amendment that removed me without notice and leveraged property I legally maintained. You always do this, she shot back. You make everything about you. I thought of how often I had erased myself to keep peace. No, I said quietly. I finally stopped doing that. She hung up. By noon, my father, Richard Whitmore, called. He didn't bother with small talk. This is reckless, he said. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Yes, I replied. It looks like oversight catching up. You're embarrassing us in front of people who matter, he continued. Business partners, friends, the venue, the bank. I pictured him standing in his office, jaw set, control slipping. You should have thought of that before restructuring the trust in secret, I said. It wasn't secret, he argued. It was efficient. For you, I corrected. Not for me. He exhaled sharply. What do you want? The question landed differently this time. Less dismissive, more cautious. I want the amendment reversed, I said, and reimbursement for the funds I personally invested in Summersby. That's absurd, he said automatically. It's documented, I replied, and enforceable. Silence. Mini hook. He said something that finally confirmed what I'd suspected for years. You were never meant to be involved like this, Richard said. Caroline needed the stability. Jonathan already has his responsibilities. You're independent. You'll be fine. There it was. I closed my eyes, not from pain, but from recognition. You decided I could absorb the loss, I said. So you gave it to me. That's not what I said, he snapped. It's exactly what you said, I replied. He didn't respond. That afternoon, Mark Feldman called. The court issued a temporary injunction, he said. No transfers, no collateral use, no refinancing on Summersby until the hearing. When is the hearing? I asked. 2 weeks, he said. And Evelyn, I should warn you, this is going to get ugly. I know, I said. I grew up with them. The wedding group chat exploded by evening. Caroline posted a vague message about unexpected legal complications and family stress. Distant relatives chimed in with concern. Jonathan attempted reassurance. My mother stayed silent. Then, a private message from Caroline. You could have talked to me, she wrote. Why did you go straight to court? I stared at the words. Because court listens. I tried to talk to you, I typed back. You didn't hear me. She didn't reply. The next escalation came from an unexpected direction. My aunt, Helen Whitmore, my father's sister, called that night. She'd always been observant, quiet, peripheral in the family hierarchy. Evelyn, she said gently, your grandmother would be proud of you. That surprised me. She knew, Helen continued. Margaret knew how this family worked. That's why she trusted you with the details. I swallowed. Why didn't you ever say anything? I asked. Because no one listens until something breaks, she replied. And now, it has. The hearing preparation was methodical. Mark compiled payment histories, maintenance records, email correspondence, even photographs of me on site during renovations. Dates, times, receipts. We weren't building a narrative. We were presenting facts. Meanwhile, my family tried a different tactic. Guilt. My mother came to Denver unannounced, 3 days before the hearing. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker, just exposed. I don't recognize you, Elaine said as we sat across from each other in a quiet cafe near my apartment. I do, I replied. I finally do. She reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean in either. This is tearing the family apart, she said. Caroline can barely sleep. Jonathan's furious. Your father feels betrayed. I watched her carefully. And how do you feel? I asked. She hesitated. I feel like I failed you. That was new. You didn't fail me once, I said. You failed me repeatedly, quietly, consistently. Her eyes filled, but I didn't soften. I needed you to see me when it wasn't convenient, I continued. Not when there's something to lose. She nodded slowly. What happens now? That depends on whether you want honesty or comfort, I replied. I want this to stop, she said. It will, I said, after the truth is acknowledged. She left without arguing. The night before the hearing, Jonathan texted me. Please don't do this, he wrote. We're family. I typed, erased, then finally sent the truth. Family isn't a shield. It's a responsibility. The courtroom in Savannah was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled, quiet. No audience, just consequence. As we took our seats, I saw my parents across the room. Caroline wasn't there. She couldn't face it. The judge, Eleanor Price, reviewed the documents without expression. She asked precise questions about timelines, about contributions, about intent. When she looked at me, her gaze was steady. "Ms. Whitmore," she said, "why were you removed as executor without notice?" I answered simply, "Because I was expected not to object." The judge nodded once. When she looked at my parents, the air shifted. The decision wouldn't come today, but the message was already clear. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about accountability. As we left the courthouse, Mark leaned toward me. "They're starting to realize," he said quietly. "Realize what?" I asked. "That you're not the extra chair anymore." I didn't look back at my family as I walked away. For the first time, I didn't need to, because the next move wasn't emotional. It was inevitable. The first offer came disguised as peace. It arrived 3 days after the hearing, delivered through my father's attorney instead of my father himself. A polite email, neutral language, carefully chosen words meant to sound reasonable. They proposed a settlement. Summersby would remain in the family trust. Caroline would still use it for the wedding. My parents would reimburse part of my documented expenses. In return, I would withdraw the challenge and sign a non-disclosure agreement. No apology, no admission, just containment. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Mark Feldman with a single line. "What happens if I say no?" He called within minutes. "They escalate," he said, "and they expose themselves further." "Good," I replied. That evening, Jonathan showed up at my apartment. He didn't call ahead. He never did when he thought authority alone would grant him access. I opened the door and let him see me fully composed, already wearing my coat. "I'm heading out," I said. "We need to talk," he replied, stepping inside anyway. He looked tired. Not regretful, just inconvenienced. "You've made your point," he said. "Dragging this out only hurts everyone." I picked up my bag slowly. "You mean it hurts Caroline," I corrected. "And you," he scoffed. "Don't turn this into a morality play." "I'm not," I said. "I'm turning it into a record." He lowered his voice. "Dad's willing to put you back in the trust. Partial ownership. That's more than fair." "For what?" I asked. "For staying quiet?" He hesitated. "That's what you've always wanted, right?" he said. "To be included." I looked at him then. Really looked. "No," I said calmly. "I wanted to be respected. Inclusion was just the illusion you offered instead." His jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm being precise." Mini hook. That's when he said something he couldn't take back. "You should be grateful," Jonathan snapped. "Most people don't get anything." I felt something settle into place. "Get out," I said. He stared at me. "Now," I repeated. He left without another word. The next escalation was public. Caroline posted an update online, not naming me, not directly, just enough implication to poison the room. "Sometimes jealousy comes from the people closest to you. Praying for peace during this season." The comments flooded in. Sympathy, support, validation. I didn't respond. Instead, I released documents. Not to social media, to the court. Mark filed a supplemental motion, including proof that Summersby had been used as collateral before ownership was finalized, and that my parents had knowingly withheld financial disclosures during the amendment process. The language was clinical, devastating. By Friday, the venue officially canceled the Summersby booking. The wedding had to be relocated. Caroline called again, this time crying. "You're ruining my life," she said. I closed my eyes. Steady. "No," I replied. "I'm refusing to let you ruin mine." Silence. Then, quieter. "What do you want?" I chose my words carefully. "I want my name restored," I said. "I want reimbursement in full, and I want written acknowledgement that I was removed without cause." She sniffed. "And if we don't?" "Then the judge decides," I said. The call ended without resolution. That night, my phone buzzed with messages from relatives I barely knew. Some supportive, some cautious, some clearly fishing for information. If this story is hitting close to home, if you've ever been told to stay quiet for the sake of family harmony, take a second. Like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you've ever been asked to swallow injustice just to keep the peace. Because this is the moment most people fold. I didn't. The court hearing resumed the following week. This time, Caroline attended. She didn't look at me. The judge reviewed the supplemental filing, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Whitmore," Judge Eleanor Price said, addressing my father, "did you disclose all material transactions involving Summersby prior to the amendment?" My father hesitated. "Yes," he said. Mark stood. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "we have documentation proving otherwise." He submitted the records. The room shifted. Judge Price reviewed them slowly. "This court does not respond well to omissions," she said. My mother's hands trembled. The ruling came 48 hours later. The amendment was suspended. My executor status reinstated. Full reimbursement ordered, with interest, and a warning issued regarding further attempts to transfer or encumber the property. Caroline's wedding was postponed indefinitely. The fallout was immediate. My parents stopped calling. Jonathan blocked me. Caroline removed every photo that tied us together. And yet, something unexpected happened. I slept better than I had in years, because for the first time, the silence wasn't imposed. It was chosen. And in that quiet, something irreversible had begun. They had lost control of the narrative, and I wasn't done reclaiming it. Silence has a weight when it's no longer forced. The week after the ruling, my family vanished from my life with surgical precision. No calls, no texts, no accidental check-ins disguised as concern. Even my mother, Elaine Whitmore, who had never gone more than 3 days without inserting herself into my decisions, went quiet. At first, I noticed the absence, the way you notice a missing sound. The hum that used to irritate you, suddenly gone. You don't miss it. You just register the difference. Then the quiet deepened. At work, things continued as usual. That steadiness became its own kind of anchor. I chaired a compliance review for a new acquisition, signed off on a multi-state audit remediation plan, gave feedback to a junior analyst who reminded me too much of myself at 25. Competent, careful, invisible. "Don't make yourself small," I told her. "It doesn't protect you." She looked startled, then thoughtful. That night, I went home and opened the box I'd been avoiding. Inside were old letters from my grandmother, Margaret Whitmore. Not sentimental notes, instructions, observations, margin comments on contracts, handwritten reminders about taxes and maintenance schedules. She had seen me. Mini hook. One letter in particular caught my attention. It was dated 3 months before her death. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means they're trying to simplify something that shouldn't be simplified. Pay attention to what they rush. That's where the truth usually hides." I folded the letter carefully and put it back. The truth didn't take long to surface. A former family friend, Thomas Keene, reached out via LinkedIn. He was a senior loan officer at the regional bank my parents used. We hadn't spoken in years. "Hope you're well," his message read. "I didn't realize until recently how involved you were with Summersby. If you're open to it, I'd like to clarify something." I didn't respond immediately. I forwarded it to Mark Feldman first. His reply was concise. "Yes, and document everything." We spoke the next afternoon. Thomas sounded uneasy. "I shouldn't be involved," he said, "but I don't like how this unfolded." He explained that 6 months earlier, my father, Richard Whitmore, had initiated preliminary discussions about leveraging Summersby as collateral for a short-term liquidity gap. "For what?" I asked. Thomas hesitated. "A business exposure Jonathan had. One of his development projects overextended. The timing was bad." "Jonathan, of course." "They needed the property clean and uncontested," Thomas continued. "That's why the amendment happened quickly. The bank flagged the executor issue. Removing you simplified approval." I closed my eyes. "Not personal, strategic." "That exposure," I asked carefully, "is it resolved?" "No," Thomas admitted. "Not fully." When the call ended, I sat very still. The betrayal wasn't that they chose Caroline, or Jonathan, or themselves. It was that they had assessed me as the least likely to object, the most absorbent. That evening, Jonathan unblocked me. His message was brief. "We need to talk." "Not like before." I didn't reply. 2 days later, I received formal notice that Jonathan's development company was under review by its lenders. Nothing public yet, just enough pressure to tighten margins. I knew how these systems worked. Once trust erodes, capital follows. Caroline broke the silence next. She showed up at my apartment without warning, eyes rimmed red, posture rigid. "I didn't know," she said before I could speak. I let her stand in the doorway. "Didn't know what?" I asked. "That they used Summersby for Jonathan," she said. "They told me it was symbolic. A gift." I studied her face. The cracks were new. "You didn't ask," I said. She flinched. I didn't think I had to. We stood there in the quiet hallway, years of imbalance compressed into a few feet of space. "They were never going to tell you," I continued. "Because it was easier if you stayed pleased." Her voice dropped. "What happens now?" "That depends," I said, "on whether you're willing to stop benefiting from things you don't want to examine." She looked down. "I can't fix this," she said. "I know," I replied, "but you can stop pretending it wasn't built on someone else's erasure." She left without arguing. The following week, my mother called. Her voice sounded older. "I didn't know about Jonathan's loan," Elaine said. "Your father never told me." "I believe you," I replied. And I did. "Why didn't you tell us you paid for Summersby?" she asked quietly. I thought about it. "Because no one asked," I said, "and because I learned early that explaining myself didn't change outcomes." She was silent for a long time. "I want to understand you," she said finally. I chose honesty. "Then stop asking what will make this go away," I said, "and start asking what it cost me." After we hung up, I met Mark for coffee. "They're circling," he said, trying to contain exposure. "I'm not expanding it," I replied. "I'm letting it exist." He nodded. "That's often enough." The next court date was scheduled. Not for Summersby, for discovery. That was when things would surface. Emails, bank records, decisions no one thought would be examined. As I walked home that evening, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement, I felt something unfamiliar. Not triumph, not relief. Alignment. The story they told about me was unraveling, and for the first time, I wasn't trying to replace it with another one. I was letting the truth stand on its own. Behind me, systems were shifting. Ahead of me, consequences were forming. And somewhere between those two forces, I finally understood. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. And correction has momentum. Discovery changes people. Not all at once, not dramatically. It happens in small fractures. Pauses in speech, emails rewritten 3 times before being sent, voices that soften not out of kindness, but calculation. The first subpoena went to the bank. The second went to Jonathan's company. The third went to my parents' private email accounts. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even react. I had learned that when systems start to move, your job is to stay still and let them do their work. Mark called me the morning the confirmations came in. "They're nervous," he said. "That's good. Nervous people make mistakes." I was already at my desk, reviewing a compliance brief. Multitasking had always been my default survival skill. "What kind of mistakes?" I asked. "The kind that create records," he replied. That afternoon, an email landed in my inbox from my father's attorney. Subject: Request for informal resolution. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I watched the city outside my window. Traffic flowing, people moving with purpose, unaware of the quiet reckoning unfolding inside a family they'd never meet. When I finally opened the email, it was exactly what I expected. A proposal. Revised terms. Language softened just enough to sound conciliatory. They were willing to reinstate me fully in the trust, reimburse all documented expenses, even issue a private letter acknowledging miscommunication. Private. That word mattered. I forwarded it to Mark with one sentence. Still no. He didn't question it. Mini hook. What surprised me was who contacted me next. My cousin, Laura Whitmore, Jonathan's wife, called late that evening. We'd never been close. She'd always been polite, distant, careful not to disrupt the hierarchy. "Evelyn," she said quietly, "I hope it's okay that I'm calling." "It is," I replied. There was hesitation on the line. "I didn't know about the loan," she said. "Not until the bank requested updated disclosures." I closed my eyes briefly. "Jonathan didn't tell you?" I asked. "No," she admitted. "And now they're asking about personal guarantees." Her voice wavered just slightly. "I'm not asking you to stop," she said quickly. I needed you to know that not everyone benefited from this." "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm not stopping." She exhaled shakily. "He always said you were fine," she said. "Independent. unaffected. I thought of all the times I'd been described that way. People say that when they don't want to look closer, I said. We ended the call without resolution, but something had shifted. The story wasn't clean anymore. At the end of the week, discovery responses began to arrive. Mark forwarded the first batch with a short message. You should see this. It was an email chain between my father and the bank, 6 months old, discussing timelines, risks, executor complications. One line stood out. Evelyn is reliable, but unlikely to contest. Removing her simplifies approval. I read it twice. Not because it hurt, because it clarified everything. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and let myself feel the weight of it. Not anger, not sadness, grief, not for what I lost, but for what I had mistaken for love. The next escalation came fast. Jonathan showed up at my office building. Security called me before letting him upstairs. Do you want to see him? The guard asked. I considered it. Yes, I said. Send him up. He looked thinner, tired. His confidence, once effortless, now required effort. We need to talk, he said, as soon as the door closed. We are, I replied. He paced once, then stopped. This has gone too far, he said. The lenders are pulling back. The project might collapse. That's unfortunate, I said evenly. You knew this would happen, he accused. I knew it might, I corrected. I didn't cause it. He ran a hand through his hair. You always do this, he said. You play innocent while everything burns. I met his gaze. No, I said. I play accurate, he scoffed. You could stop this. I could have stopped it years ago, I replied, by staying silent. I chose not to. His voice dropped. Dad's health isn't great, he said. Stress isn't helping. I didn't respond immediately. Then, using guilt doesn't work anymore, I said. You taught me that. He stared at me, searching for the version of me that used to fold. He didn't find her. When he left, my hands were steady. That weekend, my mother emailed. Not to negotiate, not to plead, to ask a question. When did I lose you? I stared at the words for a long time. Then I typed back. When you decided I didn't need to be protected. She didn't reply. Monday morning, Mark called with urgency. We have a problem, he said. Or rather, they do. What happened? I asked. The bank flagged a discrepancy, he said. A personal guarantee tied to Summersby that was never disclosed to the court. I stood. That's not possible, I said. The injunction was violated, Mark finished. At least on paper. My pulse slowed. That changes things, I said. Yes, he replied. It turns a civil dispute into something much more serious. I looked out the window again. Down below, the city moved on. Next steps, I asked. Emergency hearing, Mark said. And Evelyn, this will no longer stay contained within the family. I closed my eyes briefly. Good, I said. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about inheritance. It became about exposure. And exposure doesn't ask permission. It just happens. As I hung up, my phone buzzed. A text from Caroline. I didn't sign off on the guarantee, she wrote. I swear, I believed her. Which meant someone else had. And whoever it was had just crossed a line that couldn't be smoothed over. The correction was no longer subtle. It was coming into full view. And when it did, nothing would be left unexamined. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. 3 days. That was all the time between what my family thought they could manage privately and what would now exist as a matter of public record. Mark warned me not to expect restraint. When pressure mounts, people don't suddenly grow ethical. They get desperate. By Tuesday, that desperation had a voice. My father, Richard Whitmore, called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered anyway. Evelyn, he said, and for the first time in my life, he sounded uncertain. We need to meet. I don't think that's necessary, I replied. This is bigger than us, he said. Bigger than Summersby. I agree, I said. That's why we're letting the court handle it. He inhaled sharply. You don't understand what's at stake. I leaned back in my chair. I understand exactly what's at stake, I said. You just didn't think I'd ever force you to acknowledge it. Silence. We can fix this, he tried again, privately. No, I said. You've already tried that. He lowered his voice. Jonathan could lose everything. The words hung there, heavy. I thought of the empty chair, the amended trust, the email that called me unlikely to contest.
I didn't put him at risk, I said. You did, when you decided I was expendable.
The call ended without agreement. Mini hook. The next message came from someone I hadn't expected at all.
Margaret Lewis, my grandmother's former personal accountant, emailed me directly.
Subject: important clarification regarding Summersby. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. We met the next morning at a quiet diner just outside the city. Margaret was in her 70s now. Sharp, precise, no wasted words. I kept copies, she said, sliding a folder across the table. Because your grandmother asked me to. Inside were handwritten notes, bank reconciliations, and something else. A letter, dated the same week as the trust amendment. I don't agree with this change, my grandmother had written, shaky but legible. Evelyn is being removed without explanation. This is not what I intended.
My breath caught.
She never sent it, Margaret said softly. Your father came to her when she was already declining. She was confused. She signed what was put in front of her. But she knew something was wrong. I closed the folder slowly. This changes everything, I said. Margaret nodded. That's why I waited. I wanted to see if you would fight. Back at my apartment, Mark reviewed the materials with clinical focus. This introduces capacity concerns, he said, and potential undue influence. What does that mean? I asked. It means this isn't just about reversing an amendment, he replied. It's about how it was obtained. The emergency hearing room was fuller than before. Not crowded, but alert. My parents sat together, Jonathan beside them. Caroline, absent again. Judge Eleanor Price reviewed the new filings with visible displeasure. Mr. Whitmore, she said to my father, were you aware of this personal guarantee? Richard's face paled. I don't recall, he said. Judge Price raised an eyebrow. You don't recall encumbering a multi-million-dollar asset during an active injunction? Jonathan shifted. Mark stood. Your Honor, he said. We also submit evidence that the decedent expressed objections to the amendment while competent. He handed over the letter. The judge read it slowly. The room was silent. When she looked up, her voice was measured. This court takes allegations of undue influence seriously, she said, and it does not look kindly on attempts to circumvent its orders. She turned to my father. You may want to consult separate counsel. That was the moment the structure cracked. Jonathan leaned toward my father, whispering urgently. My mother stared straight ahead, face drained of color. The hearing adjourned, with orders for forensic review. More subpoenas, more scrutiny. Outside the courtroom, my father tried to speak to me. Evelyn, he said, please. I didn't stop walking. Later that night, Caroline texted. They're saying the wedding might not happen this year, she wrote. I didn't respond. I wasn't cruel. I just wasn't responsible for cushioning consequences. The next morning, the first article appeared, not naming me, not naming Summersby, but hinting at a prominent Southern family estate dispute involving alleged financial misconduct. The press had noticed. By afternoon, Jonathan's lender froze his credit line. By evening, my mother left a voicemail. I should have protected you, she said, voice breaking. I didn't. And now everything is falling apart. I listened once, then deleted it. Not out of anger, out of necessity. Because this phase wasn't about reconciliation. It was about truth moving forward without interference. And truth, once documented, doesn't slow down for regret. As Thursday approached, I felt no dread, only gravity. The kind that pulls things back to where they belong. And when the weight finally settled, it would land exactly where it should, on the choices that had been made, not on me. By the time the forensic accountants were appointed, my family stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. The language shifted. No more, we can fix this. No more, let's talk. What replaced it was strategy. Mark called me early Monday morning. They've retained separate counsel, he said. All of them. All? I asked. Your father. Your mother. Jonathan, he replied. Different firms, different interests. That was the moment I understood something fundamental. Families fracture long before they break. This was just the sound catching up. The forensic review began quietly. No cameras, no statements, just data. Bank transfers, email metadata, signature timing, device access logs. Things people forget exist when they assume no one will ever look. I went about my days as usual. Work, gym, dinner alone, sleep. The calm wasn't performative. It was structural. When you stop bracing for impact, your body notices. Mini hook. On Wednesday, Mark sent me a single-page summary. Read page 3 carefully. I did. There it was. The personal guarantee on Summersby had been signed digitally using my grandmother's credentials, after her physician had documented cognitive decline. The IP address traced back to my parents' home office. My father hadn't just pushed paperwork. He'd crossed a line. I closed my laptop and sat still, not shaking, not spiraling, just still. That afternoon, my mother came to my apartment. She didn't call. She didn't text. She rang the bell once and waited. When I opened the door, she looked older than she had the week before. Not physically, internally. Like someone who had run out of ways to reframe the truth. "I won't stay long," Elaine Whitmore said. "You can sit," I replied. She didn't. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Not as your mother, as a person who made choices." I waited. "I knew," she said quietly, "about the guarantee. Not the timing, not the details, but I knew they were using Summersby to stabilize Jonathan." My chest tightened once, then released. "Why didn't you stop it?" I asked. She swallowed. "Because every time I tried to intervene, your father reminded me that you'd be fine, that you didn't need protecting." There it was again. "Fine." "I believed him," she continued, "because believing him meant I didn't have to confront how unevenly we treated you." She looked at me then, eyes unguarded. "I thought if we never acknowledged it, it wouldn't matter." I nodded slowly. "That's how harm survives," I said. "Not through cruelty. Through avoidance." She wiped her eyes, but I didn't move. "I'm not asking you to stop," she said. "I know I don't get to ask that. I just needed you to know I see it now." I considered her carefully. "Seeing it doesn't undo it," I said, "but it changes what comes next." She left without arguing. The emergency injunction hearing was held Friday. This time, the room was full. Not public, but populated. Bank representatives, forensic consultants, 2 additional clerks. Judge Eleanor Price was not patient. She reviewed findings, asked pointed questions, interrupted evasive answers. When she addressed my father, her voice sharpened. "Mr. Whitmore, this court finds sufficient cause to refer this matter for further investigation." The word investigation landed like a dropped plate. Jonathan's lawyer objected. Weakly, the judge shut it down. "This is no longer a family dispute," she said. "It is a matter of fiduciary breach." My father didn't look at me. He didn't need to. By the end of the session, the Summersby Trust was placed under temporary court supervision. All parties were barred from unilateral action. Jonathan's business exposure was officially disclosed. The system did what systems do. It corrected. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. I walked past them without comment. That night, Jonathan texted me for the first time in weeks. "You could have stopped before this." I read it once, then replied, "You could have too." No response came back. The following days unfolded quietly and brutally. Jonathan's primary development partner withdrew. A secondary lender demanded immediate restructuring. Caroline postponed the wedding indefinitely. My father's name appeared in a trade publication under a headline about estate mismanagement. Nothing sensational, just factual. The kind of exposure that doesn't scream, but sticks. I received messages from people who had never spoken to me before. Some apologized, some congratulated me. Some asked what I planned to do next. I didn't answer most of them, because this wasn't a victory lap. It was an inflection point. If you've stayed with me this far, if you've watched someone finally stop absorbing damage meant for others, take a second. Like this story. Subscribe if you want to hear how this resolves. And if you've ever been labeled fine so others could stay comfortable, tell me in the comments. I read them. The final shift came quietly. Mark called one evening as I was cooking dinner. "They're asking to mediate," he said. "All of them?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "And this time, they're not setting terms." I turned off the stove. "Good," I said. "Then they're ready to listen." We scheduled mediation for the following week. Neutral location. No press, no theatrics, just consequences. That night, I slept deeply. Not because everything was over, but because the direction was finally right. I didn't know yet what I would agree to. I only knew what I wouldn't. No more silence as payment. No more proximity mistaken for loyalty. No more being described as fine while being used as ballast. The next chapter wouldn't be loud. It would be decisive. And when it ended, nothing would be ambiguous anymore. Not to them. Not to me. Mediation stripped everything down to essentials. No audience, no hierarchy. Just a rectangular table in a neutral office building overlooking the Savannah River. Beige walls, water pitchers, no one touched. The mediator, Susan Caldwell, introduced herself with the calm authority of someone who had watched families dismantle themselves, without raising her voice. My parents arrived first. My father, Richard Whitmore, looked smaller without his usual armor of confidence. My mother, Elaine Whitmore, sat rigidly, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. Jonathan arrived next, jaw tight, suit impeccable, but strained. Caroline came last, eyes swollen, posture defensive. I arrived exactly on time and took my seat without acknowledging anyone. Susan began with process, confidentiality, order of speaking, goals. Then she looked at me. Ms. Whitmore, she said, what outcome are you seeking? I didn't rush my answer. I'm seeking resolution that reflects reality, I said, not appearances. Susan nodded. Can you be specific? Yes, I replied. Full restoration of my role as executor, reimbursement of all funds with interest, written acknowledgement of my grandmother's expressed objections, and a permanent prohibition against using Summersby as collateral for any third-party obligations. The room went quiet. Jonathan scoffed under his breath. Caroline stared at the wall. Susan turned to my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore? My father cleared his throat. We want this to end, Richard said. We want our family intact. I looked at him calmly. You want the consequences contained, I said. Those aren't the same thing. Susan raised a hand gently. Let's allow each side to speak. Elaine finally looked at me. I didn't protect you, she said quietly. And I can't undo that. But I don't want to lose you. I held her gaze. I was already lost, I said. You just didn't notice. Susan intervened before emotion could spiral. Mr. Whitmore, she said to Jonathan. Your position? Jonathan leaned forward, elbows on the table. I'm willing to restructure, he said. Sell assets, make restitution. But if this continues publicly, my business is finished. I nodded once. That was always the risk, I said. You just didn't think it would be yours. Caroline finally spoke. I didn't ask for this, she said. I just wanted my wedding. I turned to her fully. You wanted the benefits, I said, without asking where they came from. She flinched, but didn't deny it. Mini hook. Susan leaned back slightly. What I'm hearing, she said, is that trust was used to stabilize risk without consent, and silence was mistaken for permission. Exactly. Negotiations stretched for hours. Offers were made, revised, rejected. At one point, my father suggested splitting Summersby into usage rights. No, I said, immediately. Why not? He snapped, frustration leaking through. Because access without authority is how this started, I replied. That landed. By late afternoon, the room felt exhausted. Defensive energy had burned itself out. Susan asked for a break. I stepped outside onto the balcony overlooking the river. The water moved steadily, indifferent to human drama. Jonathan joined me. He didn't speak at first. I never thought you'd do this, he said finally. I know, I replied. He stared out at the water. I thought you'd always absorb it, he admitted, that you didn't need as much. I studied him. That wasn't strength, I said. It was conditioning. He nodded once, slowly. When we returned, the agreement began to take shape. Summersby would be placed in a court-supervised trust for 5 years. I would remain executor with full authority, no collateralization, no unilateral amendments. I would be reimbursed in full, with documented interest. A formal statement acknowledging my grandmother's objections would be entered into record. Jonathan would assume full responsibility for his business exposure without estate backing. The family would issue no public statements contradicting court findings. Susan looked at me. Is this acceptable? I considered it carefully. Yes, I said. With one addition. They all looked at me. I want written acknowledgement, I continued, that my silence was misinterpreted as consent, and that any future decisions involving shared assets require unanimous disclosure. My father hesitated. Susan waited. Richard exhaled slowly. Agreed, he said. The agreement was signed just before sunset. No hugs, no reconciliation speeches, just signatures. As we stood to leave, my mother touched my arm. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. I didn't pull away. "I know," I replied. "That's new." That night, back in my hotel room, I poured a glass of water and sat by the window. No adrenaline, no triumph, just closure beginning to settle.
The next phase wouldn't be loud or dramatic.
It would be quieter and harder. Because now that the structure was corrected, the question wasn't what they owed me. It was what relationship, if any, I would allow moving forward. And that decision would belong to me alone. After mediation, the world expected reconciliation. That expectation didn't come from my family. It came from everyone else. Colleagues who smiled a little too knowingly. Distant relatives who reached out as if nothing had happened. Even strangers who had only heard fragments of the story, but felt entitled to a neat ending. I didn't give them one. The agreement took effect immediately. Court supervision. Reimbursements wired within 48 hours. Summersby locked down so tightly, it might as well have been in a glass case. The system worked. People didn't. Jonathan stopped calling altogether. Caroline sent one text that said, "I hope someday you'll understand. I was just trying to survive." Which told me more than she probably intended. My father sent a formal email confirming compliance with the agreement. My mother sent nothing at first. I returned to Denver and resumed my life as if nothing external had changed. That was the strangest part. Inside my body, something fundamental had shifted. But on the surface, everything looked the same. Same job, same apartment, same routines. Only now, I wasn't bracing. 2 weeks later, the court-appointed trustee requested a site review at Summersby. As executor, I was required to attend. I hadn't been back to the property since before the engagement dinner. Before the missing chair. Before everything crystallized. The coastal road curved the same way it always had. Spanish moss hanging low, salt air heavy. The house stood exactly where it always had, white and still, as if it had never been used as leverage, never been argued over, never been quietly weaponized. The trustee, Alan Pierce, met me at the gate. He was polite, thorough, and entirely uninterested in family narratives. We walked the property in silence. He noted maintenance, structural integrity, compliance history. "You've kept this place in excellent condition," he said finally. "Consistent oversight, no lapses." "I know," I replied. "Mini hook." That's when he added, "It's rare for someone to care for an asset they don't feel entitled to." I stopped walking. "That's because I was taught early not to assume ownership," I said. "Only responsibility." He nodded, made a note, and moved on. Inside the house, the air smelled like wood polish and ocean. Familiar, unsentimental. In my grandmother's old study, I found something I hadn't been looking for. A thin notebook tucked into the back of a drawer. Inside were short entries, dates, observations, nothing emotional, just clarity. Evelyn understands continuity. Evelyn doesn't rush. Evelyn sees what others skip. I closed the notebook carefully. That evening, my mother called. Not from her usual number. From a landline. "Are you at Summersby?" Elaine Whitmore asked. "Yes." A pause. "I was hoping you might be," she said. "I didn't want to intrude." "You're not," I replied. "You're asking." She exhaled. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, "about how I measured strength." I waited. "I thought strength looked like ease," she continued. "Like confidence. Like not needing anything." I looked out at the dark water beyond the windows. "And what do you think now?" I asked. "I think I confused endurance with expendability," she said. The words landed quietly. "I don't know what kind of relationship you want with me," she added. "But I want to know what you need to feel safe." I considered the question carefully. "I need you to stop interpreting my stability as permission," I said. "And I need you to stop asking me to absorb discomfort so others don't have to." She didn't argue. "I can do that," she said. "Even if it's late." "It is late," I replied, "but not meaningless." We didn't make plans. We didn't apologize again. We simply acknowledged the shape of things as they were. When I hung up, I realized something else had shifted. I no longer needed them to understand me perfectly. I just needed them to stop misusing me. The final complication arrived, unexpectedly. Mark called 3 days later. "Jonathan's attorney reached out," he said. They're asking about a private settlement outside the family agreement. For what? I asked. To limit further exposure, he replied. There's concern about additional findings. I didn't respond immediately. Evelyn, Mark added, you're not obligated to engage. I know, I said. What are they offering? An acknowledgement. Formal. Admitting he benefited from the guarantee without disclosure. That was new. And? I asked. They want it sealed. I stared out at the city skyline. No, I said. Mark didn't sound surprised. I didn't think you'd agree, he said. Because sealing it protects the same pattern, I replied. It turns accountability into a private inconvenience. So what do you want to do? He asked. I want the record to stay clean, I said. Whatever exists should exist plainly. Silence. That may have consequences, Mark said carefully. I'm aware, I replied. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. Not anxious. Reflective. I thought about how often people ask what justice looks like. They expect a dramatic answer, a moment, a reversal. But justice, I was learning, is often procedural. Quiet, uncomfortable, unyielding. It doesn't shout, it documents. The following week, the trustee filed his report. Favorable, precise, unemotional. The court accepted it without revision. And just like that, the last lever my family had been pulling disappeared. Jonathan didn't reach out again. Caroline posted photos from a small ceremony months later. Different venue, different tone. I wasn't invited. I wasn't surprised. My parents adjusted their social circle. Fewer appearances, more discretion. Life rearranged itself around the truth. On a Sunday afternoon, I sat in my apartment, sunlight cutting across the floor, and realized I wasn't waiting for the other shoe anymore. There wasn't one. The tension that had shaped my decisions for decades had evaporated so quietly I hadn't noticed until it was gone. The only question left wasn't what they would do next. It was what I would allow. And that answer was forming. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with finality. The last thing I reclaimed wasn't property. It was authorship. Months passed without incident. No new filings, no surprise emails from attorneys, no late-night calls carrying urgency disguised as concern. The silence this time wasn't avoidance. It was acceptance. The court closed the case formally in early October. Summersby remained under supervision, stable and untouched. The records were clean, the findings final. Nothing sensational, nothing hidden. That was the ending the system needed. My ending came later. I didn't announce it. I didn't dramatize it. I simply stopped arranging my life around proximity to people who had proven they confused access with entitlement. Jonathan relocated his business interests out of state. Caroline rebuilt her life quietly, smaller, more private. My father withdrew from the circles that had rewarded certainty over ethics. My mother and I spoke occasionally, carefully, honestly, without pretending the past could be softened into something else. And me. I accepted a new role at work, Vice Director of Regulatory Strategy, oversight across 11 states. A team that didn't need me to be agreeable to respect me. A salary that reflected responsibility, not patience. On a crisp November morning, I returned to Summersby alone, not as executor, not as caretaker, as myself. The house was empty, sunlight pooling across the floors. I opened windows, let the air move, walked the perimeter slowly. No urgency, no performance. In my grandmother's study, I placed the notebook back into the drawer. Some things don't need to be displayed to be honored. I sat on the back steps and watched the tide roll in and out. That rhythm had always been there. I just hadn't noticed how often I'd been holding my breath against it. Mini hook, though this time it was for me. I realized I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. People talk about revenge as if it's loud, as if it requires spectacle, public humiliation, a final speech. Mine didn't look like that. Mine looked like choosing not to explain myself anymore. Mine looked like documentation instead of argument, boundaries instead of bargaining, letting consequences arrive without escorting them in. The people who once benefited from my silence now lived inside its absence. That was enough. On Thanksgiving, I didn't attend the family dinner. I sent a polite message. No bitterness, no justification. I had plans. I hosted friends instead, colleagues, neighbors, People who knew me in the present tense. We cooked together, laughed, ate too much. No seating charts, no hierarchy. At one point, someone asked casually, "So how's your family?" I paused, then answered honestly. "They're adjusting," I said. "So am I." No one pressed. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the house was quiet again, I sat alone with a glass of water and thought about the question I'd never been asked growing up. What do you need? Not what will you tolerate, not what can you handle, not why don't you complain. What do you need? The answer came easily now. Respect, transparency, choice. Everything else was optional. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been labeled low maintenance so others could offload responsibility onto you, take a moment. Like this. Subscribe. Share it with someone who's still being told to stay quiet for the sake of peace. And if you're willing, tell me in the comments when you stop shrinking yourself to make room for others. Because here's the truth. I didn't learn until my 30s. Being overlooked doesn't make you invisible. Being silent doesn't make you safe. And being fine is not a virtue when it's used against you. I didn't burn anything down. I let the structure stand long enough for everyone to see how it had been built. Then I stepped away, not angry, not broken, not waiting, just done. And that, I learned, is its own kind of justice.